Hey all, no Null here. So in many of my theory videos, since the release of the Puzzlevision movie, I've expressed disappointment at how the movie, and the Puzzlevision saga as a whole, concluded. Today I think it's well overdue that I discuss my thoughts on the Puzzlevision movie and saga as a whole. Firstly, let me make it clear. On the whole, the Puzzlevision saga is one of the best SMG4 storylines in the series, easily being up there with the cosmology saga, and definitely being a huge step up from the previous storyline, that being the lawsuit arc. However, I personally feel that the Puzzlevision saga falls behind the cosmology saga in quality due to a simple reason. The ending of the saga was underwhelming as it failed to deliver on the year-long build-up and hype generated from the 3 movies in 2023. Firstly, from a lore perspective, there was little revealed, and what we did get was underwhelming. I'm sort of a lore guy, and so one of the things I loved about the cosmology saga was the wealth of interesting lore concepts it introduced, such as the meme guardians, the great beyond, the guardian pods, the avatars, the different universes, based on different games, etc. Comparatively, what was introduced in the Puzzlevision movie, Mr. Puzzles is cool and entertaining, but we never get an explanation for any of his TV head powers. The lore behind his character is also rather weak, especially compared to Zero. We only get his backstory in a very brief verse of the Creative Control song, and it is nothing that special. He was just lonely as a child and became engrossed in television. As a result, he became obsessed with creating his own show, and due to his deep dedication to this goal he ended up cutting off his head and replacing it with a TV. This could be a good basis for an interesting backstory, but due to it not being developed any further it fails to be very gripping. That's why when creating Puzzlevision after show, I didn't just try to explain where he got his TV powers from, but also tried to give a more deep and emotional weighting to his motivations, by expanding upon what drove him to create the best show ever. I know some people are fine with his backstory as is, and with him being a more two-dimensional cartoon either lane, and as I said previously it isn't a bad backstory, but I definitely expected it to be much more developed as Mr. Puzzles was a hyped up overarching antagonist for over a year. This feeling of disappointment at how lacking Mr. Puzzles' backstory and lore was not helped by what at the time seemed to be hints towards Mr. Puzzles having a meta element to him, like how the cosmology lore was meta and linked to the real world. It seemed like Mr. Puzzles was speaking directly towards us, the viewers, at the end of WhatFi 2023, and when the Puzzlevision arc began, it seemed as if Mr. Puzzles had taken over the SMG4 channel, as the episodes no longer had the SMG4 title. The Puzzlevision logo replaced the SMG4 logo on the thumbnails, and every community post was seemingly written as if Mr. Puzzles was making them. This led people to theorize that Mr. Puzzles had some crazy meta explanation behind his powers, which could explain how he made something like the demon keyboard, and how he was able to mind control the SMG forecast. But then it turned out that there was no deep meta explanation behind Mr. Puzzles. The audience he was speaking to was an audience in the SMG4 universe, not in real life, and he had not taken over the SMG4 channel. He was just broadcasting his own TV show. Moreover, let's not forget how they were seemingly setting up Clench to be important to this arc following his role in the No TV episode, yet this ended up amounting to absolutely nothing, and it is still unclear what the purpose of introducing Clench's character even was. Lastly, we had the concept of the ratings which grant creative control over the universe once someone's show achieves 5 stars. This is interesting, but again, it was not developed any deeper at all. Why does achieving the highest ratings in the universe grant someone creative control? This was never answered. The lore introduced in the Puzzlevision movie honestly feels very confused and poorly thought through, to be honest. The most egregious example is how Mr. Puzzles' TV head can suck character into it. This is an incredibly interesting idea, and during the Puzzlevision arc, it seemed that Mr. Puzzles had pulled everyone within the SMG4 universe, or at least in the main cast, into his head, due to characters that were not in the basement, being present in the TV world. Yet for whatever reason, it turned out that only a select few characters of the SMG4 cast were actually sucked into the TV, including Luigi and Boopkins who weren't in the basement. Despite this, Mr. Puzzles was able to manifest other characters within his TV head like Swagmaster, Shroomy and Karen despite assumedly not sucking them into his head as well. If Mr. Puzzles can perfectly manifest characters within his TV head without actually sucking them into his head, why did he even need to bring the SMG4 cast under his control in the first place, when he could just manifest them himself? And how did the SMG4 cast know that it was only them in the TV realm, and that the other characters like Shroomy and Swag were false? And Luigi wasn't present for the creative control song, so how did they know that he was also not a false character? And while it's sort of unrelated, let's briefly discuss how some important characters like Melanie and Seiko were just missing during the Puzzlevision arc. I know that they cut some of the main cast from this movie because it would have bloated the plot, but they could have at least offered an explanation as to why they weren't there, like how they explained where Melanie was in It's Gotta Be Perfect. Personally, if I rewrote the movie, I would have had Mr. Puzzles suck everyone within the SMG4 universe inside his head, meaning that when Mario returned to the real world, he would have been all alone. Not only would this add more tension to Mario's scenes to be honest, but it would have solved this weird problem they created for themselves. Now granted, the cosmology lore is not perfect, and there are definitely a few holes you could poke in the logic of it all. For example, Zero's USB was left in Spudnik's universe before being directed to the SMG4 universe by Zero, but the Revelations movie shows that Spudnik's universe is located in the God Box during the present. How did Zero's USB manage to leave the God Box? But despite some of these small issues, this was not a deal breaker as the cosmology lore was just so unique and inspired, and any plot holes were not painfully obvious. An issue with both sagas currently released on SMG4 that I've noticed is that they clearly don't fully plan a saga out from the very beginning. For example, the Genesis arc was clearly well thought out right from the first episode. However, they clearly had not planned the Revelations arc at all until after WotF 2021. How do I know this? Just look at some of the lore concepts introduced in the Revelations arc. There were no hints towards future element like the God Box or Zero being made up of two different individuals in the Genesis arc. But more importantly, there are some pieces of lore in the Genesis arc that seem to contradict lore in the Revelations arc, that mostly reveal what seems to be old answers to lore questions that were clearly intended to be the original answers before they wrote the Revelations arc. For example, there are hints that Zero's motivation for creating a new universe wasn't to create a perfect universe, but rather so that he could live again, likely in reference to how being a virus monster was a painful experience and he wanted a fresh new, virus-free form. I have a feeling that they had not planned out the Puzzlevision arc when writing the movies last year, which may be why the Puzzlevision movie didn't feel as conclusive and satisfying as it should have been. Before I finish this segment on lore, here's a lightning round of stuff that felt unexplained or underdeveloped. Why did Meggy recognize the Puzzlevision symbol in Western spaghetti? How did Mr. Puzzles create or obtain the demon keyboard and simulation, as he is only shown to have omnipotent power within his own TV head? Why did he create the movies last year by manipulating events in the real world, rather than just sucking the SMG4 cast into his TV head straight away? After WotF 2023, why did the status quo immediately revert to normal, despite Mario and Marty being thrown into prison and assumedly Mario and SMG3 likely being on bad terms? The fact that Mr. Puzzles gifted the showgrounds to SMG4 is never brought up, and I was hoping that there would be something interesting that would be done with the showgrounds in the movie, such as Mr. Puzzles taking over the castle and redecorating it to match his theme, rather than SMG4's, or maybe he had some sort of secret base hidden on the showgrounds. Lastly, while it was cool to see the 2023 movies referenced in the Puzzlevision movie explicitly in the scene before the Creative Control song, it would have been nice to have seen the events of those movies have more of an impact on the story of the movie, as a lot of emotional and life-changing events happen to the SMG4 cast at the hands of Mr. Puzzles in those movies. Secondly, it does feel like they fumbled with Mr. Puzzles' character in the end. He was perfectly mysterious, intriguing and threatening all the way up until the scene in the Puzzlevision movie where Mr. Puzzles confronts Mario. Now don't get me wrong, I do like the bumbling and goofy cartoon villain direction they sort of ended up taking with Mr. Puzzles in the end, as I have always wanted a classic SMG3 type villain to be reintroduced into the series, and of course, other aspects of Mr. Puzzles such as his awesome design, creative abilities and showmaster personality I'm also a huge fan of. But in 2023, Mr. Puzzles was being hyped up as a massive threat, this ominous mysterious antagonist working from the shadows, very similar to Zero, yet he turned out to be this somewhat incompetent and bumbling cartoon villain who all of a sudden was taking center stage in his shows, rather than acting from the shadows like last year, only leaving small clues towards his involvement in the shows. The character he ended up being just seemed to contradict what he was being built up to be, and was pretty underwhelming, even if I do really appreciate the direction they had ended up taking with his character in the end. The scene where Mario all of a sudden gains the upper hand over Mr. Puzzles, while very entertaining, seriously undermined the ominous and mysterious nature of his character, making the following scene with the rest of the cast inside Mr. Puzzles' head feel out of place as once again Mr. Puzzles is presented as this huge threat despite just being taken down a peg by Mario just a few minutes earlier. Thirdly, it feels like the Puzzlevision movie didn't properly deliver on the theme and message that was seemingly being built up throughout the saga. The Puzzlevision poster released after the No TV episode was seemingly confirming a theory I had, that the entire theme of the Puzzlevision saga was about how the pursuit of entertainment could lead to the harm of others, in this case, being the actors of the show. In other words, it was seemingly about the exploitation and mistreatment of actors. The 2023 movies, which were highlighted on that poster, showed all of the characters suffering and losing things dear to them, even if this wasn't portrayed too well with What Fi 2023, so I was convinced this was the underlying theme to this saga. Yet the Puzzlevision movie ended up having no real substance or underlying message. The Revelations movie had an underlying message in contrast about not being stuck in the past and moving on. On a final note, the movie thumbnail actually portrays this entertainment leading to harm theme quite well actually, on top of just being a cool thumbnail. That makes Mr. Puzzles appear like an ominous puppet master, while also calling back to the movies last year. Lastly, quite frankly, the climax of the Puzzlevision movie just feels insanely underwhelming and uninspired. Once Mr. Puzzles reaches 5 stars and takes over the universe, it honestly doesn't feel like they represented this idea very well in unique or inspired ways. We just see the SMG4 cast forced to make a brief performance on some bland and low quality set, especially boring considering that Mr. Puzzles literally controls the entire world and could probably easily find a far more interesting set. And they briefly also show some other characters being controlled by Mr. Puzzles through screens. At least I think it's through the screens that he controls these characters, as assumedly that's why Mario doesn't fall under his control immediately. Mario was being set up as the character who would save the day, and while this does happen, it is a short scene, and he has no involvement whatsoever in the actual final battle against Mr. Puzzles, which is just a fight between a giant Mr. Puzzles and the SMG4 cast using their usual weapons. It's not a bad fight scene at all, don't get me wrong, but again, considering Mr. Puzzles literally controls everyone in the universe, and assumedly the universe itself, I would kinda expect something more epic to happen. Compare this final battle to Melanie's final battle against Zero, or the chase scene between Zero and the 3 Marios. This final fight lacks the emotion and scale that those scenes had, as in the former Melanie finally found peace and moved on following Axel's death, and in the latter Melanie was just seemingly killed, and all hope seems lost as the three Marius try to make a desperate escape from Zero, who seems unstoppable without Melanie being there. Mr. Puzzles comes off as weak in comparison to Zero, and there is no deep emotional investment in this final battle as no character has grown in a character arc, or just died, and nor are the stakes all that high, as again, Mr. Puzzles just appears rather weak. Following the final fight, Mr. Puzzles has a funny yet surprisingly pathetic final line, and gets ultimately defeated in a fucking Team Rocket style Mayo. This epic scene where SMG4 smashes Mr. Puzzles away has awesome animation, but the moment doesn't feel especially earned or impactful as a result of the lack of substance or emotional impact the movie had. The ending scene is once again set during sunset on the showgrounds, and unlike in the previous movies, the final message is not even that special, nor have any of the characters grown from this saga. At least the ending joke was funny. I know I have been incredibly harsh on the Puzzlevision saga and movie in this video, but just like my thoughts on the lawsuit arc, I still found the saga and movie really entertaining. It never felt boring at any point, which is the biggest crime a piece of media can commit in my opinion. I was just very disappointed that we didn't get another movie that captured the magic of the Revelations movie and the cosmology lore. But while the lack of substance to the movie and lack of satisfying lore reveals would make the movie feel almost pointless to the wider SMG4 continuity and lore, the introduction of Mr. Puzzle's character pretty much saves the entire saga. He's a very entertaining and cool new villain, and I'm glad he wasn't killed off in the Puzzlevision movie, even if once again the SMG4 writers wrote an underwhelming return for his character and another underwhelming arc with him. Hopefully What Fi 2024 will redeem his character in terms of not being another story focused on him with an underwhelming conclusion and little substance lol.